Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are fine. This is the first set of lectures which I'm delivering to you via video in order to assist you. I believe that you are keeping well. I'm going to share my slides now in order to assist you to learn Principles of Economics 2, which is macroeconomics. I'm going to send the course outline during the course of this week. So for today, I just want to introduce the first topic. This course outline has got 7 topics. There are 7 topics. The first topic is the data of the science of macroeconomics. The second topic is national income determination. The third topic is budget problems and the economics of fluctuations. The fourth topic is the balance of payments and the exchange rate systems. The fifth topic is the monetary system. And then the sixth topic is economic growth models. And the final topic is macroeconomic policies and development strategies. So right now I'm going to share a screen of my lecture notes, which I believe are going to benefit you, even as I present. So when we are looking at macroeconomics, we are looking at that part of economics which deals with aggregates. That's why it's called macro. Macro is a Greek word for something which is big or something which is aggregated. So as I said, I'm going to give you the course outline during the course of this week. And the course code is likely to change because the curriculum this year changed for microeconomics and macroeconomics. I'm still going to send the slides, but I'm going to present what I need to present in these slides. The data of macroeconomics is as follows. We've got national income statistics. With the consumer price index, the producer price index, the wholesale price index, and the most important of the price indices is the consumer price index, which in the US is called the retail price index. And then we've got unemployment statistics, industrial production figures or statistics, international trade, and balance of payments statistics, including the indices of international trade as well. The data of the science of macroeconomics is analyzed through the following means: statistical models, mathematical models, which are not included in this line, econometric models, national income accounting techniques, or as is the case with economics, a combination of approaches, which may include approaches which are not covered or encapsulated in this presentation. And then the key concepts of macroeconomics, we've got real GDP, for instance, inflation and deflation, unemployment, recession, depression, models, endogenous variables, exogenous variables, market clearing, flexible and sticky prices. These are some macroeconomic concepts, but the list is by no means exhaustive. It's just to give you a feel of what you may expect to encounter in macroeconomics. And then the most common concept when we are looking at the data of the science of macroeconomics is the concept of GDP, gross domestic product. This is a good measure of how well the economy is performing. In Zimbabwe, a parastatal of government called Zimstat calculates GDP via administrative data, which are products of government functions such as tax collection, education programs, defense and regulation, and statistical data which comes from surveys of, for example, retail establishments, manufacturing firms, and farm activity. We need to explore the circular flow model of national income because there are ways in which you can conceptualize this national income via GDP. We can conceptualize national income in two ways. At an elementary stage, as the total income of everyone in the economy, or total expenditure on the economy's output of goods and services. And this can be diagrammatically represented by the two-sector model of the circular flow model of national income. The entire economy is conceptualized as comprising of two sectors, namely households and firms. Households supply factors of production, which on this diagram are represented by labor. But we also have enterprise, land, and capital. And then in turn, households get from firms, the second sector in this simplified economy, they get income for the factors of production, which are wages, rent, interest, and profit. Wages for labor, rent for land, interest for capital, and profit for enterprise. In turn, firms, which are production units, households are consumption units, and factor supplying units. Firms are production and good supplying units in the economy, in the scheme of things in the economy. Firms supply goods and services, which in this case are represented by goods. And in turn, they get a return for goods and services in form of expenditure dollars, which is just a translation of the income which is paid to households. So for the economy as a whole, income must equal expenditure, because in this two-sector model, we don't have outflows or leakages. So GDP measures the flow of dollars in this simplified economy. And then we can also conceptualize this two-sector economy as having this kind of markets. Factors of production, we know that households, they don't literally look for individual firms to supply factors of production, but in most cases, the supply of resources or factors of production to firms or businesses is normally mediated by resource markets, which are also called factor markets, which is what is now illustrated in this diagram or figure, where households supply inputs into these factor markets, which are relayed to businesses as resources to facilitate production of goods and services. And then when businesses have produced goods and services, this gives birth to product markets. We know products are demanded by households. And what we note in this diagram is that the flows of goods and services they are anti-clockwise, whilst the flow of revenues or money, the money flows are clockwise. The diagram can be drawn in such a way that the money flows are anti-clockwise and the good flows are clockwise, depending on the positioning of businesses and households. And then we know that in a real world economy, it's impossible for businesses to operate without a government, which is regulating economic activity. So in many countries, there is a government which provides the legal framework to regulate the contracts that are reached in order to facilitate production in an economy. So what we see here is that the government is placed in the center in order to provide certain goods and services which are needed by businesses, like infrastructure, for instance, public goods. You know, the arteries of commerce, like the transport network, the railway network, the road network. In most countries, the provision of such goods is normally facilitated by government for businesses to operate, and even households, they need goods services from government, maybe in form of health-related goods and services, provision of education, provision of protection by the police and the soldiers, and so on and so forth. To facilitate its own activities, the government in turn levies taxes from businesses and households. The other flows are the flows that we dealt with on slide number 7. And then in the 4-sector model, not only do we have the government, but we now have the financial sector, which includes insurance companies, banks, the stock exchange or the stock exchanges, and so on and so forth. The aim of the financial sector is to facilitate finance intermediation of funds in the economy. Intermediation of funds in the economy. We know that production and logistics are almost impossible without money, if not completely impossible without money. It's necessary that there be money to facilitate exchange of value or to provoke generation of value in the economy. So the financial system acts as a platform for deficit units in the economy, which happen to be businesses and to a certain extent the government as well, to be able to interact or connect with surplus units, which happen to be households. So households supply deposits and firms and the government borrow those deposits in form of loans, and the financial system that lubricates economic activity. Thus lubricates economic activity. And then in the 5-sector model, we have got the international trade, which in this diagram is represented by the rest of the world. The arrow, which is black in color, which is pointing to the rest of the world, represents goods which are produced in the domestic economy but sold to other countries. These are exports. And then the goods that we buy from other countries are called imports. And the money flows are in opposite direction of the goods, the movement of goods. And then national income concepts. What is national income? I've been talking about national income, but I haven't defined it. National income refers to a measure of total output or production of a given country over a specified period of time, which is usually 1 year. But national income aggregates, I must note, ladies and gentlemen, they can be calculated over a 3-month period. In fact, advanced economies like the United States of America and the United Kingdom, and Japan, for instance, and Canada as well, and Australia, are now able to calculate what are known as quarterly national income statistics or quarterly GDP statistics. So national income aggregates under certain conditions can be calculated over a 3-month period, such that the calculations they can be on a cumulative basis every 3-month period when it has lapsed, and then figures can be published. We've got various national income concepts, which include gross domestic product or GDP, gross national product or GNP, net national product or NNP, net domestic product, which is NDP, gross domestic income, which is GDI, gross national income, which is GNI, net national income. What is GDP? Gross domestic product refers to national income. It refers to national income or output, which is produced by factors of production that are found in or located in a particular country. I'll take that again. This is national income or output, which is produced by factors of production that are found in or located in a particular country. That are found in or located in a particular country. The key word here is domestic, which denotes or conveys the idea of the location of the factors of production that facilitate the production of output or income. This implies that the residence or citizenship status of the owners of the factors of production is not important or is immaterial when considering this concept of national income. How about gross national product? Gross national product is the total output of an economy produced by nationals or citizens of an economy, regardless of where they are working from or where they are resident. The key word here is national, which denotes the ownership of the resources or the factors of production, irrespective of where they are located. The difference between GDP and GNP is called net property income from abroad, though it may be a net outflow at times. If it is a net outflow, obviously, in essence, it will be net property income to abroad. If the figure is negative, in reality, it will not be net property income from abroad. It will be net property income to abroad. What is this net property income from abroad? Net property income from abroad refers to property income from abroad less property income to abroad. It's property income from abroad minus property income to abroad. So it's a net figure, as you can see, because from the gross property income from abroad, we subtract property income to abroad, so that we are left with a what? A net figure, after subtracting one aggregate from the other. So when we add to GDP net property income from abroad, we get GNP. In other words, when we subtract net property income from abroad from GNP, we get GDP. I'll take that again. When we add net property income from abroad to GDP, we get GNP. The opposite is that when we subtract from GNP net property income from abroad, we get GDP. So NPI is property income from abroad minus property income to abroad, where PI stands for property income and NPI stands for net property income. Net property income from abroad can be positive, negative, or zero. If it is positive, it means property income from abroad is greater than property income to abroad. If it is negative, it means property income to abroad is greater than property income from abroad. If it is zero, it means property income from abroad is equal to property income to abroad. And then the other scenario is that if property income from abroad, if net property income from abroad is positive, if property income from abroad is positive, then GNP is greater than GDP. I'll take that again. If NPI is greater than zero, in other words, if NPI is positive, then GNP is greater than GDP, or GDP is less than GNP. If NPI from abroad, is negative, then GDP would be greater than GNP. I'll take that again. If NPI from abroad is negative, then GDP would be greater than GNP. If NPI is zero, then GDP is equal to GNP. GDP is equal to GNP. How about net national product? Net national product is simply GNP, the concept that we're covering on the two previous lines. It is simply GNP minus depreciation. What is depreciation? Depreciation refers to the replacing or repairing of existing infrastructure in the economy. It is also called the replacement investment. Depreciation is thus part of gross investment in any given economy. It is that part of gross fixed capital formation or gross investment which restores an economy's infrastructure. And then we've got national income at market prices and national income at factor cost. So we want to distinguish between the two. GDP at market prices equals GDP at factor cost plus taxes less subsidies. Straightforward arithmetic. And then GDP at factor cost. It is just GDP at market prices plus subsidies less indirect taxes. You reverse what we are doing in statement number 1. And then GNP at market prices, it's simply GNP at factor cost flowing from number 1 plus indirect taxes, which may be value-added tax in a particular economy, less subsidies. And then how do we determine national income? How do we measure national income in an economy? There are 3 methods of measuring national income. We have what is known as the expenditure method, we have the income method, and the output method. So what we are looking at the present moment is just a summary of the expenditure method. To determine national income through the expenditure method, we must add all types of spending on finished and final goods and services. This implies that consumer spending, which is also called consumption expenditure, investment spending, which is also called investment expenditure, government spending, which is also called government expenditure, and net exports expenditure, which is X minus M or just X with subscript N, must be added together to get total national expenditure or just national expenditure. So in terms of the last bullet, they will just summarize what I just said. National expenditure is equal to consumption expenditure plus investment expenditure plus government expenditure plus net exports expenditure. And then what does personal consumption expenditure comprise of? It consists of consumer spending by households. This is spending on consumer goods and services. And it entails expenditure on consumer durable goods, which include cars, fridges, DVD players, and so on, televisions, and so on. Semi-durable goods, which include clothing, perishables, which include food, newspapers, and so on. And then we've got consumer spending on services, direct services of lawyers, doctors, counselors, and so on. And then we've got gross fixed capital formation, which is here truncated, or which is here styled gross investment. This is all investment spending by the Zimbabwean government and firms. For instance, it can be the Kenyan government and firms, or the British government and firms, or the US government and firms. I just contextualized it to Zimbabwe because that's where I live. Investment spending has three components, namely all final purchases of machinery and equipment by the government and businesses. Number two, all construction activities or projects in an economy are reckoned as investment in economics, macroeconomics. And then the third point is that changes in inventories, not the monetary or inflationary changes in inventories, but physical changes in inventories, as reckoned by their monetary denomination, are reckoned as investment. Investment means enhancing the capacity to produce. Investment in human capital is excluded when measuring investment expenditure. Investment spending is facilitated by the purchase of tools, machinery, and equipment. And also investment in paper assets is also excluded when measuring investment, because investment in paper assets may actually involve spending on already existing capital in an economy. So the construction of dams, factories, buildings, and other infrastructure in an economy is included under investment. Owner-occupied housing or residential units are reckoned as investment because they may be let out to generate income over a certain time period, especially for businesses in the real estate industry, in the real estate sector. How about inventory changes as investment? GDP, or any national income aggregate, is designed to measure total current output. Thus, we have to make an effort to measure all current produced output which has been left unsold in company warehouses or storage spaces. Thus, GDP incorporates the market value of all currently produced output, whether it is sold or not sold, or regardless of whether it's sold or not sold. If inventories and other works in progress were to be excluded from the GDP measure, then the measure or statistic would understate the current produced level of output. How about a decline in inventories? This must be deducted in figuring out current GDP. Why? Since the economy would have spent on total output by an amount which exceeds current production. If inventories are declining, it implies that expenditure in the current period outstripped production in the current period. So there's part of expenditure which will be associated with previous production. So to avoid double or multiple counting, we would deduct a decline in inventories to figure out the correct level of GDP. The difference being reflected in an inventory reduction represents a part of GDP taken off the market this year. How about non-investment transactions? which I've already alluded to. The transfer or investment in paper assets or the buying and selling of financial instruments, whilst it's reckoned as investment in banking and finance parlance or nomenclature or terminology, it is not reckoned as investment in economics. Why? Because investment in economics is technically defined as the expansion or creation of capacity to facilitate further production. So for us to qualify whatever we regard as investment, whatever is produced must facilitate further production in an economy. This is not to deprecate or to understate or to look down upon the importance of such transactions in facilitating or lubricating economic activities, just to make sure that we stay focused and we stick to what we are really measuring when we are trying to figure out these different national income aggregates. How about gross investment and net investment? Gross investment, also called gross capital formation or gross fixed capital formation, includes the production of all investment goods, that is, those that replace worn-out infrastructure, plant, machinery, and equipment, plus any additions to the economy's capital stock. Therefore, gross investment is equal to depreciation plus added investment. Investment is equal to replacement investment, which is depreciation plus added investment. In other words, net investment, which is styled added investment here, is simply gross investment minus replacement investment. How about government expenditure? It refers to government current purchases of goods and services. It includes all defense expenditure and all current government spending at provincial and local levels. It might be city, town, county, and other levels of administrative jurisdictions found within a particular country. On finished goods and services and all direct purchases of resources, especially labor. What does it exclude? All government spending on non-defense durable assets are excluded. Why? Because they've already been reckoned under investment. All government transfer payments, e.g. pensions, unemployment benefits, which are abbreviated UBE, and relief aid are also excluded because they are not associated with current production. And then how about net exports? Net exports are nothing but the difference between exports, which is spending by foreigners on domestically produced output, and imports, which is spending by domestic residents and citizens on foreign produced output. The net export spending represents activities which are associated with international trade and also international finance. And then I've got just a table here to illustrate how national income is measured using the expenditure method before we cross over to the income method. Now, if you look at gross domestic product, it's simply an aggregation or a summation of consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure, and net exports expenditure. And then we go to national income, the income method. National income, the income method is a method of measuring national income where we add factor incomes in figuring out GDP. Let us just recall that GDP, which was reckoned as a summation of expenditures under the previous method, the expenditure method, here is reckoned as a summation of incomes earned through the production of goods and services. This is the income from people in jobs and in self-employment, plus profits of private sector businesses, plus rental income from the ownership of land, plus interest from capital resources that people own. But when we add these three, we get gross domestic product by factor incomes. Only those incomes that come from the production of goods and services are included in the calculation of GDP by the income approach. We exclude transfer payments like state pensions and so on, unemployment benefit, welfare assistance such as housing benefits, because these are not associated with current production. Including them would inflate the national income statistic or aggregate, leading to a wrong conclusion about the actual size of current output or production. And then private money transfers from one individual to another, which are not associated with any production, are also excluded because, again, this would lead to the inflation of the national income figure or statistic. And then income not registered with tax authorities, like income which is earned through the informal economy or the shadow economy, is excluded from national income statistics, not by design, but by default. Published figures for GDP by factor incomes are normally inaccurate because much activity, especially in developing, emerging and transition economies like the Zimbabwean economy, most incomes are not registered with tax authorities, and some economic activities are of a subsistence nature, like subsistence farming, where people produce in order to consume at the production unit. It's the household which is producing and it's the household which is consuming. So there may not be enough capacity, or actually there might not be any capacity in a developing economy for the government to ascertain how much was produced for consumption at the domicilium et citandi of the production unit. Domicilium et citandi is the residence or the location of the production unit or the firm which is actually engaged in production. And then we have got a lot of barter trade like transactions, especially in rural areas and other underdeveloped and semi-developed economic systems. The adjustments that are made are as follows. Number one, compensation of employees. The largest share of GDP is normally paid as wages and salaries by businesses and the government to their employees. Not well. A large fraction of wages and salaries flows to the government as taxes, and a certain part flow to their pension schemes and insurance schemes. Number two, we have got rent. This is money which is paid for occupying space, either residential space or commercial space. And commercial space may be production space or just commercial space, as in space which is occupied by aids to trade, like banks and insurance companies, transport and logistics and so on. The money is received by businesses and households that supply property resources to the economy. It includes monthly rental payments that tenants make to landlords and lease payments firms pay for the use of office and factory space. Now, how do we figure out net rental income, which is taken into account when measuring GDP or gross domestic product? Net rental income is gross rental income less the depreciation of the rented property, because as the rented property is being used, it depreciates. At a certain point, it may need renovations. Now, to make a provision at an economy-wide level for future renovations, it means when we get gross rental income, a provision must be made for depreciation of the rented property. How about interest? This comprises money paid by private businesses to suppliers of money capital. Why money capital now? Because we are no longer under the expenditure method. We are now under the income method. That's number one. Number two, because the flow of money capital intermediates the creation of physical capital resources in an economy. It includes interest on savings, deposits, certificates of deposits, and corporate bonds among the most common financial instruments to be found in the money markets or in financial systems of many countries. How about profits? They are divided into proprietors' income, which consists of net income of sole proprietors and other unincorporated businesses. Business earnings or profits that accrue to owners of registered corporations or firms. National income subdivides profits into three categories, elaborated on the next slide, which is slide number 35. We've got corporate income taxes, which are levied on corporations, net earnings, and thus flow to the government. B, we have dividends. These are part of profits which flow to firms' shareholders who are normally households. And then we have undistributed corporate profits, which are also called retained earnings. This fraction of the profits is retained for what purpose? To acquire new plant and equipment, or just for expansion purposes. And then we've got stock appreciation under the income method. Stocks of raw materials may rise nominally or in currency denomination terms. They may rise in value without a physical appreciation of the same. This flows to owners of the stock as income. In figuring out GDP, this nominal or currency denominated appreciation in stock must be subtracted because it will inflate the GDP figure as if national output has increased when it is just a monetary or currency denominated kind of appreciation. And then the output method. The output method is also called the value-added approach. Basically, the measurements tell us how the industries perform over time or in a particular year. They can measure structural changes in the country. The methodology involves estimating the value-added or intermediate output of goods. Take, for example, a car industry. Suppose that the cost of producing a car is $50,000. Assume that to make the car, the manufacturer requires $500 worth of steel, which the manufacturer buys from the steel industry. Steel in this case represents the intermediate product which is used only at some point in time during the production of the undergood, which is a car in this case, rather than in the form of a final consumption good. The value of the car quoted earlier at $50,000 has already incorporated the cost of steel. It includes $500 worth of steel into the calculation, including $500 worth of steel into the calculation of national income, will actually lead to double or multiple counting. The same goes to other intermediate products like pig iron, say, which costs $300, or rubber, which is used in the manufacturing of a car, which may be $500. Basically, the value-added approach just adds the value of the intermediate product. In our car example, we'll be having the pig iron, which is used maybe in making the block of the engine, and then the rubber for various parts of the car, and then the steel and other components, lights, parts of the engine like the pistons and so on. And finally, we've got the final output, but the approach that we use is to aggregate the values of the intermediate products to get the final output. Therefore, in the calculation of national income, one can either add up all of the intermediate products or simply take the final value of the final product. To summarize, the output approach in measuring national income involves the following three stages, which are estimate gross output in various sectors, determine the intermediate output or outputs, estimate the reduction in the value of assets from wear and tear, more commonly known as depreciation or replacement investment. And then GNP and GDP can be obtained from either directly or by summing all the different intermediate products in an economy. In two, while national income product or net national product is obtained by deducting in two is determine the intermediate product. And then while national income product is obtained by deducting 3 from 1, deducting 3, which is depreciation, from the gross output in various sectors. Nominal versus real GDP. GDP or any national income measure is usually expressed in nominal or currency denominated terms. The use of money is beneficial because the commodities that consist or comprise national income are heterogeneous. Monetary valuation has one major drawback in that nominal values are vulnerable to or easily susceptible to inflation. Inflation overstates national income whilst deflation understates national income. This implies that there is a need to adjust nominal national income figures or statistics so that effects of inflation or deflation are removed from the statistics. The adjustment process makes use of an appropriately designed statistical index called the National Income Deflator or the GDP Deflator. What is the GDP Deflator? It is simply equal to nominal GDP over real GDP multiplied by 100. As we can see, it's an index because it's nominal GDP over real GDP multiplied by 100. The GDP deflator reflects the prices of all goods and services produced domestically, whereas the consumer price index reflects the prices of all goods and services bought by consumers. The GDP deflator is also defined as a selected index, say the consumer price index or the retail price index, expressed in hundreds as follows. GDP deflator is an appropriate index, say an appropriate price index, say the consumer price index, for instance, divided by 100. As an example, if in 1964 GDP was 64 billion and the CPI was 125, then real GDP is calculated as follows. Real GDP will be 64 divided by the consumer price index in hundreds, which is simply 125 over 100, which is 64 multiplied by 100, all divided by 125, which gives us $51.2 billion. If in 1980 GDP was 64 billion and the consumer price index had gone down from 125 to 92, in other words, there was depreciation. Obviously, GDP understates the actual value of national income. So we need a GDP deflator, which in reality here would be a GDP inflator, since the the use of nominal figures actually understates GDP. Real GDP would be 64 divided by 92 over 100, which in essence is 64 multiplied by 100, all divided by 92, which gives us $69.57 billion. What is the Consumer Price Index? The Consumer Price Index is a measure of the overall level of prices. What is it used for? It's used for tracking changes in the typical household's cost of living. It is also used to adjust many contracts for inflation, the so-called cost of living adjustments to income, or the collars, to allow comparison of different dollar figures from different years, How Zimstats in Zimbabwe constructs the CPI. This is a simplified exposition or model of how CPI is actually compiled or constructed. A survey of consumers is done to determine the composition of a typical consumer or household's basket of goods, what is called the consumption basket of a household. And the household is taken to be a family unit with 6 members. We know sometimes there may be 20 members, sometimes there may be 15 members, sometimes there may be 2 members or just 1 member. But on average, we assume that in a typical household, there are 6 members. Every month, data is collected on prices of all items which are in the household consumption basket to compute the cost of that basket. And then the CPI in any month is equal to 100 multiplied by the cost of the basket in that month over the cost of the basket in a base period. The base period is a year or a month which is chosen for its stability or chosen for its importance for many economic reasons as a reference point, for instance, in the compilation of national income statistics. We have got an example of the basket which contains 20 pizzas and 10 compact discs. We know this is unrealistic, but we just give you an example to simplify our analysis. If we assume that the base year is 2000, now to calculate the CPI of any particular year, you will simply be multiplying to calculate the CPI of, say, 2000 itself. It will be 20 multiplied by 10, which is 200, plus 15 multiplied by 10, which is 150, which gives us 350. 350 divided by 350, since we are in the base period, we get 100. So the CPI of the base period or base year is always 100 because they are dividing a number by itself. And then for the other years, we get 370. We get 370 divided by 350, which gives us 105.7. And then we get 400 divided by 350, which gives us 114.3. And then we get 410 for 2003 divided by 350, which gives us 117.1. And then the inflation rate will be the difference between the current year CPI and the previous year CPI. Current year CPI and the previous year CPI. For instance, 114.3 minus 114.3, 114, let me do my maths here as we go through our slides. 114.3 minus 114.3. If you look at 105.7 minus 100, we get 5.7. And then and then 114.3 minus 105.7, we must get 8.6. That's what I'm getting, so that would be corrected, 8.6. And then 117.1 minus 114.3, we get 2.8. We get 2.8. But the calculation of the inflation rate, it depends on which year you actually choose to calculate the inflation rate. If you look at these CPIs, the base is 2000, where the consumer price index is actually 100. And but if we say 105.7, yeah, so those are the figures. And then we look at stock versus flow concepts. Stock versus flow concepts. In economics, we make use of stock and flow concepts quite a lot. A person's wealth, for instance, is a stock, but a person's saving or savings is a flow into the tap of wealth. The number of people with college degrees in a country or university degrees is a stock, but the number of people who have just graduated, the new graduates, is a flow into that stock. Government debt is a stock like water in this tank, but the government budget deficit, which feeds into government debt, is a flow, and so on, and so forth. Similarly, investment is a flow, but national income is the size of national wealth, or GDP, is a stock, if I may put it that way. Chain-weighted real GDP. Over time, relative prices change, so the base year should be updated periodically. In essence, chain-weighted real GDP updates the base year every year. This makes chain-weighted GDP more accurate than constant price GDP. But the two measures are highly correlated, and constant price real GDP is easier to compute. And so we'll normally refer to constant price real GDP. What is Okan's law? Okan's law simply looks at the relationship between unemployment and GDP. One would expect an inverse relationship or negative relationship between unemployment and real GDP. This relationship is clear in terms of empirical evidence. According to Okan's law, a 1% decrease in unemployment, a 1% decrease in unemployment is associated with the 2 percentage point of additional growth in GDP. In other words, a reduction in unemployment by 1% is associated with an increase in GDP by 2%. And this Okan's law is a very important concept in economics, which is associated with the studies of a Yale professor whose researches were very prominent in the 1960s. This Yale professor was called Arthur Okan, hence the name Okan's law. So for today, we are going to end here. Thank you so much for joining in. I believe you have benefited from this video exposition of the first topic in our